Tanya, thanks for being here. First off, I just want to ask you, how important is the land to you, and why is it so important to you?
It's very important to me because I grew up with my grandparents who were, harvesters, fishers, hunters, trappers. My grandfather was a trapper, so the first few informal education, few years of my life was out on the land, actually. So we depend on the land for, shelter, food, our medicines, and I think it's very important. It's very important to me, and it's very important I pass on the teachings to our students, because a lot of our students are so disconnected with the land, and when you're disconnected with the land, you don't know the importance of what the land provides us as humans, not only as Indigenous people, but as humans.
What are some of the things that your grandparents taught you, that growing up?
Well, to live off the land, really, because, they were out in a trap line. There's no stores, it was a flying trap line. So, how to live off the land and sustainability, food sovereignty, not those fancy terms being used, but it was just our way of life. Out on the land. So, even at a young age, like identifying berries, identifying plants, what plants are used for medicinal or purposes, or what plants are edible. And, and the good thing about is a lot of those things that were taught to me were in my language, like the animals that my grandfather came home with from his trapping days. I knew all those animals in Cree, my language, before I even knew them in English. So language is a big part of land-based learning.
Well, that's awesome to hear, and you took those teachings, and you're now a land-based teacher yourself, right? So can you explain sort of what a land-based teacher is, and what you do when you're teaching?
Well, as a land-based teacher, I think my job is to connect those kids back onto the land. And, as a result, they become not only stewards of the land, but they start really appreciating, like I said, what the land provides us. So there's, so my classes are both in class and out on the land. As you could see on my Facebook page, like we go out as much as we can, which is probably I'd say 75% of my land-based teachings are out on the land. And, a good percent of that time too, I'm out looking for a classroom, what could be a lesson out there? Where is my next lesson going to take place? And then because, using land pretty much as a textbook, I would say, and lots of teachings, and a small percentage of my time is in the classroom. And when we are in the classroom, I'm talking about the safety of before our land excursion, and also talking about the objective of why we're going out on the land. Because if you don't give the students the objective, a little history of why you're doing the lesson, they become disengaged. So once they know the purpose of the lesson, then they're all pumped to go out.
So what do you hope to instill in your students when it comes to teaching them land-based skills or teachings, in a sense?
Well, what do I hope to instill? Well, to, like I said, to appreciate what's out there, especially now with the contemporary issues that we're facing today, such as the pandemic and also climate change. You start teaching the students how to, like I said, sustainability. Like just yesterday, we were out on a clear cutting, or they were clear cutting, and we went in there and we measured the trees. We aged the trees that were harvested. We were talking about harvesting practices, why deforestation, and how it affects the biodiversity. So I think it's very important that the students know the impact, the environmental impact industry has on our lands. It doesn't only affect the animals and the birds and the fish out there, it affects us as human beings, because in our ecosystem we're all interconnected. And when you start talking about climate change, you know, a lot of people deny that our climate is changing. But if you're a person that's out on the land a lot, like such as myself, you start to see the changes. So that's what I want to instill in these kids is I want them to start reading nature, knowing nature, and also knowing what the nature provides us as humans, you know, not only, you know, like the trees we were talking about yesterday, they take in carbon and they give us oxygen, you know. What happens if we have no trees? We don't have a healthy ecosystem.
And another big thing that you had touched on earlier, and you were talking about language. Why is language so important in this as well?
Well, language, well, as Indigenous people, not only as Indigenous people, but Indigenous people all over the world are, you know, without our language, we lose a sense of identity. And our languages, when we go out on the land, there's certain things that we identify or certain traditional practices out there where our Cree language has words for them that English doesn't. So I think that's one big thing, because there's certain words we have in our language and our practices that the English language can't interpret. So
Right.
I think it's very important we retain our language or revitalize it in many cases, because where I work are young. They don't speak fluently their language, but you know, we're getting there. We've come a long way and we're getting there. And so we don't only have a culture language teacher, we have 2 culture coordinators and myself as a land-based teacher, and I use a lot of language in my teachings. So, and I know the kids pick up.
So, Tanya, what do you hope happens in the future when it comes to land-based learning and teaching? Like, where do you want to see it go or hope it goes, like, just in that sense?
Well, you know, every school, I think, should have a land-based program, whether you're in an urban setting. You know, it's an informal way of educating your students. And I know it works. My program's been running for 5 years. I know the students are engaged. They're getting a lot out of it. And we need to see more of that in all schools, you know. And the feedback that I get from my social media pages, you know, they say, I know your title is K-12, but you know, I'm this age and you know, I'm learning a lot of this. I wish they had this when I was going to school. So there's definitely a need for it. And like I said, when you're out on the land and learning about what's out there, you don't learn it in school. And science, for example, like Western science has been the dominant science taught all over the world. You know, what about our Indigenous science? You know, it's not being recognized. So with land-based learning, it's not just another outdoor education program as many see it as. It recognizes that connection Indigenous people all over the world have with the land. So that's where it stems from. So when you teach land-based education, you're teaching about the traditional practices and the Indigenous science. That's what it's all about, because we've always had what we're taught in school. We've always had those like our arts, our sciences, our technology, math. You know, as you could see, some of the lessons that I do, we've always had those as Indigenous people. So weaving those 2 sciences together, I think, is what schools need to do. You know, and formal education isn't for everybody. You can't have, some kids just don't like sitting in the same classroom for 7 hours. You know, and with informal education, you know, the kids are out there, they have hands-on experiences, and I know they get a lot out of it.
Yeah, I know. I wish something like that would have been around. I mean, you just said, like, I did not like sitting around for 7 hours at a time either. But, you know, are there any, this is more just based on your location, you're based in Saskatchewan, right? So are there any sort of unique challenges that come about for you when you're teaching on the land, or is there anything sort of maybe unique about your area that makes being outside a bit different than somewhere else?
Well, definitely different from an urban setting, but for the most part, especially if it was in a big city, you could still go out. We have parks, you know, there's always a little river or a stream where a lot of teachings can happen. But I think what urban settings, because I've talked with a lot of educators, or they ask me questions, their biggest challenges for them is access to lakes and rivers and trees and stuff like that, but also the transportation. As for where I work, you know, they really support my program, and the challenges I think is, for instance, to go to a coniferous forest. It's a mixed forest where I work, because it's a Plains Cree community, so there's a lot of farmland surrounding the area. So I have to drive maybe an hour. Like yesterday, we drove an hour to get to this clear cut, to this coniferous forest. So the distance in driving, but the cost too. The cost is, you know, when we have camps, we try to have seasonal camps. You know, right now I'm looking for winter camp, but you know, sometimes like I go to Dr. Kevin Lewis's camp in Minnestickwin, which is like probably, I would say, 4 hours away. And I can only take a certain amount of students, even, you know, I want to take as many, but I can't. And there's certain teachings we learn from each other, from different cultures or different locations. We learn from each other because, for example, Dr. Kevin Lewis's camp has like dog sleds. You know, we don't have that in Sturgeon, so we have to drive 4 hours to get a taste of that or bring someone else in. Right. So sometimes, because it's in a Plains Cree community, it could be challenging because I want to take kids in the forest and stuff like that. So yeah, and of course money is always a factor, but money is always a factor, but the big thing is it shouldn't cost anything to learn from the land. So I try and take advantage of somebody who's looking for a group of students for their language or for their culture camp. You know, that's where I step in. I take advantage of other educators. So there's a lot of collaboration too with people in the community, and I don't do it alone. You know, I'm the land-based teacher in that school. A lot of my teachings come from me, but I also utilize our local knowledge keepers and our elders, because I don't know everything. And I'm Woodland Cree, and I work in the Plains Cree community, so I have to use a lot of the people from the community because they're the ones with the knowledges, and they know what their children should be learning.
That's well said there, Tanya. We're going to have to leave it there. We're running a bit short on time here, but I want to say a big thank you, Miigwech, to you for joining us here and sharing some insight and knowledge into what you do and just how important the land truly is. So again, thank you, Miigwech, for taking some time with us.
Yeah, Tinigi, for having me. Thank you.